Hello and welcome to the Brain Injury Group podcast Growing Minds, where we aim to share advice, guidance and insight to parents, families and individuals supporting children and young people post-brain injury and the professionals that work alongside them. Thanks also to our sponsors, Abilities Enabled, for helping us bring this podcast to you. My name's Claire and I'm the COO at the Brain Injury Group, and today I'm joined by Laxmi Patel of Boys Turner. Hello Laxmi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you.
Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the role that you do at Boys Turner?
Yes, so I'm a special educational needs solicitor and I'm a partner at Boys Turner, and I head up our small but very niche special educational needs team. We are also supported by community care solicitors as well. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. So yeah, it's something that it's the only area of law that I've sort of specialised in and worked in.
Great. Lots of challenges along the way, I'm sure. Returning to education following a brain injury to any child or young person and their parents and their families can be a massive challenge, can't it? How do you and the team there support and help with that return to education?
Well, I suppose everyone's journey is slightly different, their starting point, etc. So I always say, first thing, it will be obvious if huge amount of support is going to be needed, if we're looking at something that's quite radically different. If they are going back to their old school, I would usually say sensible, pragmatic approach is to set up appointments with your SENCO and any professionals who are involved. So I'm sure that many parents will have therapy, reports, medical reports, etc. All of that, of course, should be shared with the school. And I would say the first port of call is to share that information and then have a meeting. It's going to need more than one meeting with the SENCO, with professionals as well, if that's needed as well. As I say, varies obviously from young person to child, but that's the first port of call, I would say, and looking at taking professionals' advice as to what support is needed. And it might be that they can't start, full time, etc. It might be that they need a graduated start, but that's got to be supported initially, perhaps more than, as it progresses, perhaps less support. In some circumstances, it's very clear that they're going to need a significant level of support before they can go back, in which case, again, first port of call is always with the SENCO, the school, and to see, what support is going to be needed. And perhaps we might be looking at an EHC needs assessment if it's something that the school feels that they're not going to be able to put in place from within their own resources.
Yeah, and I suppose imagine the challenge is always that sometimes we wouldn't necessarily know as parents or professionals, or the young person themselves may not necessarily know what they're going to need until they've gone back into that school environment, that education environment, and then the challenges may, regardless of some of the accommodations made, might still be there, and like you say, then need some more input or some more structure around how that support is delivered. So you mentioned the EHC needs assessment there. I've been through the EHC process myself, so I know it can be a challenge. But for those parents or professionals that are listening to the podcast that maybe don't know what an EHC needs assessment is, or indeed what an EHCP is, can you tell us a little bit about how they work and what that looks like?
Absolutely. So as I said, it's not your first port of call. Generally you don't get an EHCP, then that's an education, health and care plan. So that's not where you go first of all. First thing is to discuss it with the school, with the SENCO, see what support they can put in. If it becomes very clear that the school's not going to be able to put that support in, or they're going to struggle, or perhaps people just don't understand what your child's needs actually are, and often that is an issue, and you need an assessment, then you would be asking for an education, health and care needs assessment, and either you as a parent can ask for it, but I would always say work closely with the school can put in the request as well. Either way, you are going to need the school's support, because the school is going to have to provide information to the local authority as to what support they have tried already, or why they believe an EHC needs assessment is needed. So what is an EHCP? It's an education, health and care plan. First port of call is the assessment to see whether you're going to end up with an EHCP itself. And what an EHCP is, it's a legally binding document that sets out the child's needs, whatever difficulties they're having with their education, and then the support that is going to meet those needs. So if they're having certain amount, difficulties perhaps with speech or, mobility, etc., it's what support are they going to need to help them with that in their education. And it will also set out health care needs and provision and social care needs and provision as well. And it will also set out the name of the school and type of school that's going to be able to make that provision.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think something from my perspective as a parent, having been through that process, could you give any guidance to parents once, if somebody goes through the process successfully, gets through the needs assessment or manages to understand that is the next step for their child, we get sent the EHCP to have a look at and make sure that we are happy with it and that we feel like it's going to be right for our child. And that can be a challenge because we're not teachers or professionals working in education. But are there some key things that parents should look for, do you think, when they are reviewing an EHCP? Very different for each child, I understand that, but are there some key things that when you're reviewing it, parents should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the whole process for an EHC needs assessment, if it all goes through, is a 20-week process from the moment you've asked for the assessment to the assessment being carried out to ending up with a final plan. So that's a 20-week process if all goes well. It doesn't always go well, as we know. But let's say it's going well. At around week 16, the local authority, if they are going to issue a plan, will send out a draft plan. And that is then, but parents are then given 15 days to go through it. And what I would say, but the key bits that I would say look at are Section B, which is the description of the educational needs of the child. So this is where you really do need to make sure, parents need to make sure that every element of educational need is set out there as fully as possible. And when we're looking at education, we're not just focusing on cognition and learning. That is one of the elements. We're also looking at social communication needs. We're looking at emotional needs as well. We're also looking at sensory and physical needs. So all those areas have to be covered. And because I think lots of parents will think, well, if perhaps they sort of feel their child perhaps is quite emotional at home, perhaps, or feel that there's something not right with them, or there's something not quite right there, but perhaps school doesn't see it. And often schools don't see these things. That doesn't mean it's not there. So all of that's got to be described. And again, parents might feel, well, perhaps they've got a physical disability, but that's not educational. Because it's not about learning, cognition, etc. But it is, because it affects their access to education. So that's also got to be put in there. So it's making sure that all of those 4 areas are populated as fully as possible. And that will come from the assessment reports. So all the assessments that the local authority will have done and that parents will have shared as well with the local authority. It's extracting all of that information as much as you can and putting it under those different sections. And then I would say the other part of the plan that's crucial is Section F of the plan, as you know, and that's where it's setting out the provision to meet the difficulties that have been set out under Section B. So when that part's drafted, you've just got to be very careful. I think parents have got to be very careful as well, that it's very succinct. There are no woolly words. And I'll just give an example. For if for example, it says, this child needs TA support, teaching assistant support. Well, that's just too woolly, because it doesn't actually say how many hours or for what lessons, whether it's in small groups that TA is going to be supporting a group of 5 perhaps, or is it that your child needs one-to-one support. So that sort of specificity needs to be set out in the plan, so that anyone picking up the plan can see straight off exactly what is to be provided by whom and how much support is needed. Okay, so I mean, I think that's key. The other thing as well, when the plan is sent to parents in its draft, they won't name a school on there or even a type of school. And that's done deliberately because parents have the choice to name their school, their preferred school, where they would like their child to go to. So don't panic when it comes back and that section's sort of, left blank. We get asked that a lot, It's so that parents can put forward their preferred school.
Yeah, great. And then once you've done that, you've got your EHCP in place. It's shared with the school, and you're working with the school to try and get those provisions in place to make sure that education's accessible for your child. What are the next steps then? How do we make sure that support remains in place for our children, that the things that are in the EHCP are being managed correctly? And how do we make sure that on an ongoing basis those things continue to be in place, especially as our children get older, change, develop, grow, their needs may change, they may get more needs, they might need slightly less support in school as they sort of progress through their rehabilitation from their brain injury. What's the next steps once the EHCP is in place?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a document that sort of sits there and then it's signed, sealed, and that's it. It's a document that's evolving. Okay, once it's finalised, it's got to be reviewed annually. If the child is under 5, then it's even more often than that. It could be every 3 to 6 months. It's got to be reviewed because of the changes, obviously. But at the very least, for an older child, and we're talking about EHCPs that go up to 25 years. So you can receive, support for education up to 25 years. But that EHCP has got to be reviewed annually at the very least. So that's one way of monitoring that EHCP is still fit for purpose. But it also means that if there are fluctuating needs, and presentation, that you don't have to wait a year. That if there is something that's changed, that's quite radical, that makes a difference, to the support that's going to be needed, the school can, parents can ask for an early review. Sometimes it's called an emergency review, sometimes it's called an interim review, but it's an early review. And that's really for the professional school. Local authority is invited as well. And anyone else that parents want to have invited to that meeting as well. But it's where you can all sit down, look at what's working well, what's not working well, look at the EHCP as well, making sure that, the description of needs is still correct. New reports may have been, coming in, etc., and perhaps things need to be tweaked as we have a better understanding, perhaps. And then looking at the support that's needed as well. So sometimes things may drop off, things may need to change, things may need to increase as well. So all of that, has got to be updated. It's the local authority that's responsible for the EHCP. So it's not the actual school itself. The school will hold the meeting, but all the papers following on from that annual review will get sent to the local authority. And the local authority will then look through all the paperwork that's been collated, what the recommendations are, and they will then make a decision about, whether they're going to amend the plan, and if so, how. But that's how it's kept updated.
Yes.
All right.
Great. So you mentioned when the draft plan comes through, it doesn't mention a school. So for those parents who perhaps have had children in mainstream school for their, that's all they are familiar with. I think it would be helpful for families to understand what the options are if your child has had a brain injury, and then is unable to return to their mainstream school. And there's a wide variety there, I appreciate, depending on someone's needs. But what are the options for parents? What can they consider and look at, and what is the process of sort of looking into which one might be suitable for their child? Okay.
So, I mean, you've mentioned the mainstream, local authority mainstream schools. There are local authority special schools as well. And they will specialise in all sorts of different ones will specialise in different areas of need. So it's making sure that, you've picked the right, so it's not just a generic perhaps, or a generic school might be fine as well if it caters for your child's needs. But some of them are quite niche. So some of them may be for children with ASD, perhaps, some of them are for children with emotional behavioural needs, etc. Some are physical needs. So they are very niche. There's local authority special schools. Those are all the types of local authority schools. Sometimes you might have a mainstream school with a base, a resource base attached onto it, or a unit, sometimes they're called. And those bases will have small class sizes, so they might have 10 or 14 or so students in there. And I find that all of those resource bases are operated slightly differently. Some have it where they expect the children, young people, to be in there for perhaps the majority of their school day and access mainstream school for a few lessons perhaps. Some of them have the opposite expectation, where the young person attends mainstream for most of the day and just goes to the resource base perhaps at registration, lunch times and touch base in the afternoons, or perhaps they go there for some therapies and some one-to-one. So it's you've got to be careful when you just looking at resource units. Check that the one that you are looking at does meet the requirements of your child. So there's that. There are independent schools as well. So there will be independent mainstream schools. And sometimes those might work where local authority mainstreams might not, simply because they generally have smaller class sizes. And it might be that your child could cope in a mainstream school, but it's got to be an independent one, simply because of the smaller class sizes. Usually they're staffed, might have higher levels of staffing as well, which might work for your child. So there's that. There are independent special schools as well. And it might be that you have to look at one of those simply because the local authority doesn't have that kind of specialism in your area. So those are the different types generally. And that includes free schools, academies, under the law, they're all equal under the law. You'll also have the possibility of, when looking at schools, you could go for day schools. But for some, especially older children, young adults, you could be looking at residential as well, if that's appropriate. And sometimes parents don't always want something that's residential, but it might just be that there's nothing local to them. So they're having to look further afield. So, they can be looking further afield if that's the right thing for their child as well. Parents always have the option of taking their child out of school and educating at home. And if that's their choice, that's called electively home educating. Okay. I always say be very careful with that though, because if you go for that option, what you're saying to the local authority is that we are making our own arrangements, and the local authority therefore then doesn't have to follow through on anything that's in the EHCP.
Yeah,
right?
and
so
and
a
that's,
little bit of caution around that.
Parents have to fund that themselves as well, don't
they? They will have to fund it themselves. Yeah. So there's nothing, local authority won't be responsible for anything in the plan. And that includes all the therapies, any tuition, etc. So that's something to be careful about. And sometimes we find that parents don't understand that, and without knowing, they agree to educate at home, but not understanding the implications of that. Okay, so a bit of care with that. And sometimes electively home educating is confused with EOTAS or EOTAS, which is education other than at school. Now, if it's agreed by the local authority and yourself that your child is unable to attend a school, they can't attend for whatever reason. Often, it may be emotional needs or perhaps physical needs, all sorts of reasons. They can't attend school. And it's not just that school, it's any school generally that they can't attend. Okay, so local authority would have done their due diligence and would have consulted with several schools, and all those schools are coming back with a no, that they can't meet needs. Then it might be that the local authority may agree with parents that your child can't attend a school, and they would be looking at putting EOTAS into that EHCP under section F of the plan. And by doing that, local authorities admitting that there is no school, and therefore that they will then fund a home package for your child. So, and that's like a full-time package if that's what your child can, cope with. And it would be looking at tuition at home. It could be people, perhaps, teachers coming into the home, tutors coming into the home. It will include outdoor activities, opportunities for socialisation, physical activities, all of those things, whatever it is that equates to, it's almost a bespoke timetable for your child, and that will be fully funded as well by the local authority, okay? But not if it's electively home educated. So it's very important to know that distinction.
It's a really important difference, isn't it? That you have to have both parties agreeing and go down the EOTAS route rather than choosing as a parent that you would prefer to home educate, or you think the right thing for your child is to home educate. So I mean, there is a hurdle, to jump through if you want to. What I say, you feel that your child is unable to attend school. It's having to show that school cannot meet your child's needs, but not just that school, it's other schools as well. And as you can imagine, that's how do you show that? Well, the local authority will simply consult with those schools or with the EHCP and ask the schools if they can meet needs. And some schools might come back with it might be difficult, but that we could do it perhaps with additional resources. So they might need some additional funding, and they might say, well, if you paid for a one-to-one, we'll be able to do it. In which case, then local authority may not agree to EOTAS because there is a school that can meet needs. So it's almost very much like a last resort, them agreeing to EOTAS. You have to have almost ticked off all the other options
Absolutely.
Before you get to that one, which can be a challenge, can't it? Especially if as a parent you are worried that all of those placements are going to fail and it's going to cause more stress for your child to get there. But it is a difficult process, isn't it?
Yeah, and it does happen, as you can imagine, EOTAS packages, could cost a lot of money. We're looking at resources here, they could be quite costly to the local authority. But also, local authorities want children to be attending school and to be socialising with others if that's possible as well. So there's that sort of, you've got to sort of marry that up. So there are often disagreements around that. And often what, parents would then, if they really do believe that whatever school's been put forward by the local authority, if parents feel that school cannot meet needs for whatever reason, we would have to say, well, it's about getting the evidence together to present to the local authority that parents believe it can't. And usually that means getting therapists or an educational psychologist perhaps to go into the school to compare the schools, etc., and provide a report with their views.
Okay. I think it would be good at this juncture to talk about transitions. I think you've got your EHCP, you're comfortable that it's been working in the school that your child's attending, if you've been able to get to that stage, and then suddenly you come up to the realisation that from next year or the year after, that's got to change because your child's moving from primary school to secondary school or secondary school to further education. What needs to happen at that point, and how long does that process take, and when should those discussions start to happen?
So those discussions, so we're looking, say for example, we call them, let's talk about the key transitions. So the key transitions are primary to secondary, secondary to post-16, perhaps post-18, and starting school as well, in reception. But generally what happens is that the process of, because obviously if the EHCP's got to be amended, naming the new placement, that EHCP's got to be amended. So the process of that starts at annual review. So it would be the annual review before transition, but some annual reviews take place in the summer. So it's about timings. Generally, in an ideal world, the annual review would take place in the autumn term, so that ahead of the year of transition, so year 6 for a year 7 start in a new school. So it would take place in the autumn term, the annual review, and there'd be a discussion around the EHCP and placements, etc. Parents would then, have thought about which placements they would like. Ideally, parents will have visited, perhaps even the year before. I always say, we were talking previously about schools, always visit schools. parents must always visit schools if they possibly can, because one special school is very different to another's, very different to one. They're all
and
so
even
different.
taking guidance from other parents, your child's very different to their child.
Absolutely.
So even if they've got similar diagnoses or conditions, that child, there's no two children the same, and your child best. So I would echo that visitation is.
Yeah. And parents do often say, even though they've read all the paperwork, etc., and on paper it looks fine, etc., etc., they just get a feel when they walk through and they see other children like their child, perhaps have got similarities, and they feel that, yes, this is going to be a good fit. So do, narrow down by all means, but then nothing beats a visit. So going back to the annual review ahead of secondary school then, hopefully by then parents will have done some homework and will have sort of narrowed down perhaps to the schools that they're thinking of. If parents are going for an independent school, they will have their own admissions processes. So I would say, before you put forward a school to the local authority that's going to be an independent school, make sure that they are going to offer a place, because you don't want it to be a wasted choice. So make sure, if they have got, they need to see your child, if you need to share the EHCP with them, make sure that's done. They will often want to see your child and do, admissions sort of just to visit, etc. If it's residential, they may even need an overnight stay as well. So make sure all of that's done, and if it's an independent school, that they are offering a place from the year that you want it, because often I would say specialist independent schools are so full that you might be doing an assessment sort of a couple of years ahead even. So it's about planning and being prepared. So then it's attending that annual review, if it's in the autumn term or earlier, but hopefully in the autumn term.
And I think just coming back there to a point that you mentioned before, sorry to interrupt you. If your annual review does fall later in the school year, you can... They should come to you, I would expect, offering that review earlier, but you can, as a parent, ask for that review to be brought forward.
I would say ask for it earlier, but what sometimes parents find is that in the summer term, so if we're talking secondary, in the summer term of year 5, they may have had their annual review then. And at that annual review, they will have been, or they should have been, looking at, the next placement, all right? So, in an ideal world, it would be autumn, but just simply because of the timings of your own EHCP and when it was finalised, you might find that it actually happens in the summer term. So perhaps a little earlier, okay? But whichever way it is, make sure that either the year 5 or the year 6, annual review is discussing secondary school placements. So it's going through that EHCP, making sure that all the support in there is still correct, looking also ahead and what support may be needed upon transition as well. And sometimes we find it really helpful to put in there, because there's got to be a very careful handover and visits over summer, perhaps, with staff coming in, etc., etc. So that all is something that can be put into the plan as well, about transition arrangements that have to be done. And then it's parents putting forward their preferred placement, and papers all then get sent to the local authority. They will consider the parent's preferred placement, but they will also look at their own choices, okay? And they will send consultations out to all of those placements, and they will collate all the responses, and they will then make a choice. Now, I always say, if parents know the schools in their area, and they know that the local authority is likely to consult with, perhaps several other schools, it's a good idea for parents to also visit those schools as well, and to keep a log, a table or something, to explain why those other schools may not be appropriate, just to preempt it, I would say. And if parents also have any treating therapists or anyone else professionally who's working with their child and knows them well, they could also be asked to comment on, this is something that parents could do perhaps to sort of prepare for this transition, to try and get everything aligned so that, you've got all the evidence and information needed, and you've explained why you've, considered the other placements, but perhaps why they might not be suitable, and why the one that you want is the most appropriate one, okay? Now, what parents must remember is that they're not entitled to what the law, there's case law which talks about the Rolls-Royce provision. Okay, so they're not entitled to the best. All right. I mean, every parent wants the best for their child, obviously, but the law doesn't entitle you to the best. All right. So it's about the local authority only has to name a school which is adequate. All right, which is quite a lower threshold. So a school that's good enough. It's got to be able to meet the child's needs. So this is where you're looking at the EHCP, looking at the description of difficulties in section B, making sure every annual review that's updated as needed, and also looking at section F, the support that your child needs. So it's important how that's set out. Something that we come across often, say for example, that distinguishes certain schools is that some children need on-site therapies. For whatever reason, the therapists themselves will advise that, it might be that whatever your child's needs are, it's not good enough for them just to say, perhaps go out of the classroom and spend 30 minutes fortnightly with, say, for example, a speech and language therapist. That's not going to do it. They need someone perhaps who's on site, a speech and language, in that school. The school has that level of expertise that they're sort of dipping in and out of the class, So it's not just that 30-minute session and then there's nothing. It's dipping in and out. And perhaps it's also working with other therapists as well. So if there are sensory needs, perhaps, with the occupational therapist as well. Physical needs, perhaps, occupational therapists often need to work very closely with physiotherapists. So depending what the area of need is, sometimes these people need to be on site because otherwise those meetings are just never going to happen. So, it may be that your school, the school that you're looking for, has that provision.
And that can be clearly linked back to the needs in the EHCP, can't it, as a clear line?
Yes. Yeah. So it's looking at those sorts of things and trying to point out why it is that this particular school is going to meet your child's needs, but why the other schools are not going to be able to meet your child's needs, right? So it's just being aware of all those things.
Great, because it's a challenging time to
yeah.
feel that responsibility to make sure you get that best education for your child, which again might as parents mean that we're looking at that Rolls-Royce option for us, but it's about making sure that we understand that we have to say why that school is the one that can meet that child's needs and why the other ones can't. And I think that's sometimes a challenge for us as parents, isn't it? Because we automatically think everyone should agree that that's the best school, it gives the best options, and we all want that for our children, which is natural.
Yeah.
What about if at annual review the decision is taken by the local authority that EHCP no longer needs to be in place, that other methods of support are adequate to support the child's needs through the school and through discussions with the school, or that the school can do that through without having an EHCP there? What are parents' options there, and how does that work?
So those decisions usually will follow on from the annual review. So meetings being had and school staff, perhaps therapists, etc. But it may be that they all decide that, we don't need as much support for this child. That goes back to the local authority. They have to then, if they're looking at ending a plan, or sometimes parents will see it as a cease to maintain the plan, there is a set process that's got to be followed. It starts off with the annual review, where discussions have to be had, where there also has to be discussion about what's next. Okay, now if the child's in school, what's next often will be, we're looking at school picking up, whatever support is needed. But often cease to maintain decisions follow at sort of 18, 19 years or even beyond, where traditionally you would say the child would be finishing school or college. And it might be that there's just an assumption that they're not going on to do anything else, perhaps, at college afterwards. So the local authority might be looking at ending the plan. And that's where we see most of the cease to maintain decisions. But there's a set process. So after the annual review, they've got to make a decision. Now, if that decision is that they're going to end the plan, they need to send out a notice to parents. Now, what happens is that EHCP is not allowed to end immediately until parents have got the right and have exercised their right of appeal. Okay, and if they have exercised their right of appeal, this is an appeal to the SEND tribunal. That's a specialist tribunal. If they have exercised their right, then you all have to wait until that case is heard and resolved before that plan is then ended. Okay, it might also be that parents not appealing, but the local authority has to wait until that right of appeal window has gone. And generally you're looking at there's 2 months in which parents, once they get that decision, they've got 2 months in which to contact mediation, which is a requirement if parents are challenging that decision. Parents don't have to go through mediation if they don't want to, right? And there may be all sorts of reasons as to why they might think it's sensible, or perhaps they think it's not worthwhile them doing that. But they do need to have a mediation certificate. And whatever the date on that mediation certificate is, they've got an extra month from the date of that. So you could extend, it's between 2 and 3 months that parents have got to appeal that decision. But once that appeal right is gone, if parents don't appeal, then that EHCP will come to an end. Okay. Now the other thing that's important, I think, that perhaps people forget about, is that it might be that your child is in a school or a college, perhaps 18 or so, and local authorities saying we're going to end the plan now. If parents do exercise their right of appeal and get that lodged, that EHCP is not allowed to be ended. So it's got to stay in place until you get it resolved through the appeal process. So that placement that's named on the EHCP has got to keep on admitting your child until the appeal process is ended.
Okay. I think that's really important for people to understand, isn't it? That right to appeal and sort of the process involved in that.
Yeah.
And I think that probably follows on to the next question that I've got for us, which is perhaps a little bit about what happens if you feel like the LA, the local authority, are failing to adhere to what their obligations are, any statutory timelines, where the provisions in the HCP perhaps are not being met, or what are those next steps? I think it'd be good here as well, I think, to cover something that I know a lot of parents I speak to experiences. You mentioned earlier about making sure it's really important that EHCP is updated after annual review if there are changes in your child's needs, or they've grown and there are things upcoming that might need to be considered. And I know that there are several discussions that I've had with parents where you've had the review meeting, you've had those really interesting and useful discussions about what's next, and then you never get an updated plan.
All the time.
So I think in that sort of global sense, you've got perhaps LA failing not to meet their obligations in terms of timescales or statutory views and stuff, and provisions not being met within the HCP. What are parents' rights in that circumstances? What should they do, and what processes should they follow?
Well, there are some things that are absolutely, it's in statute that local authorities must do. It's a duty. So there's no ifs, no buts. It's a duty. They've got to do it. If they fail to do it, that's a breach. And that's a pretty straightforward breach. And those sorts of breaches are, let's say, for example, after the annual review, within 4 weeks of that meeting, the local authority has to send a decision. Whether they're going to amend it, whether they're not going to amend it, and if they are going to amend it, here are the amendments, and here's the amended plan. And then if they are going to amend it, they have a further 8 weeks, right? So that's one thing. So it's very clear. They haven't done it, that's a breach. There's also a requirement for them to make the provision in section F of the plan. If that's not done, that's a clear breach again, if that's not done, because there is a clear duty that they have to provide that. If that's not done, I often say, before you jump in, and I'll talk about what action you can take, but before you jump in, I'll say, have a discussion with the school, find out what's going on, ask the SENCO what the difficulties are. If that doesn't resolve things, you need to let the local authority know, because at the end of the day, it's the local authority that's responsible for delivering, and they may not even be aware. So have that discussion. The other timelines are, the annual review is a classic. You mentioned that, and often we call it the never-ending annual review cycle, because you just one year to the next, and you just have a draft plan all the time, and nothing changes. And we just see so much of that increasingly. So that is a clear one. The other one is, for example, if parents are going through the EHC needs assessment, and that's supposed to be a 20-week process, they often go over 20 weeks. Now, if that's in agreement with parents, and parents, okay about it, perhaps because they're waiting for reports, parents may agree, let's just wait and get these reports in. But if it's just dragging on and on and on, then, it's a clear breach. So those sorts of things, I would say that those are very clear breaches. And here you're looking at judicial review, which is when a public body is not doing what they are required to be doing, and you then have to challenge them. So the first thing to do with judicial review is you have to give them notice. You have to put them on notice that this is what you're going to do, and that's what's called a pre-action letter. Okay. Now, those pre-action letters are generally straightforward, usually sent by your solicitor to the local authority, setting out what the breach is, giving them a week, 2 weeks to put it right. If not, saying that you're going to be taking judicial review. And I would say most of the time, when it's a very clear breach, it's resolved by doing that. Okay, those pre-action letters are sent to the local authority's legal team, and you'll usually get a swift response back. Okay, putting it right. Okay, so there's that. Sometimes I would say just be a little bit cautious about what it is that you're asking for, because sometimes 20-week process, I explained, EHC needs assessment ending with a plan. If the local authority is not ready, and we all wish in an ideal world that there weren't these breaches and everything was done in a timely manner, but there may be a good reason why the local authorities not issued a plan within the 20 weeks. They may be waiting on reports themselves, for example. By pushing them to issue the plan, they could just issue the plan as is. They could also issue the plan as is without naming a school, and just naming a type only, which they are allowed to do. And then you've got to think to yourself, well, could I have waited a little while, rather than them issuing a plan that's sort of half populated and it doesn't name a school? So how useful was that? So just think about what it is that you're asking for and why and what it's going to achieve. But, first off, really, you're looking at a pre-action letter. Now, there are other things as well. I mean, judicial review, if it goes all the way, I always say parents try and get legal aid for judicial review, because there is a risk that you may have to pay the other side's costs. Okay, so get legal aid for that. But aside from that, the other things that you could try to do is local authority complaints. Sometimes that works, sometimes not. There are two levels. You try, and if it doesn't work, level 2 complaint. The other thing you might want to do is to make a complaint to the local government ombudsman. Okay, that generally will only work if there's no right of appeal to the SEND tribunal. If there's another remedy, then that's got to be sort of exhausted first.
I think, I don't know if this is correct or not, but I think I've seen where parents have had to have gone through the stage 1 and stage 2 complaints process, because the local government ombudsman will ask them, have you done this? And if they haven't, they say, you need to go and do this.
Yeah. And local government ombudsman won't look at it if parents have got an alternative remedy as well, like you said, the complaints, but also if they've got a right of appeal. If parents have got a right of appeal, then they won't look at it either. But there are certain things that the local government ombudsman, I would say, is quite good at. It's delays, etc., and they can award, they can fine local authorities as well. I'm not saying that that's what parents are after, because you want a quick resolution. That's what you want. But sometimes, say for example, where local authorities not made provision, so your child's not had, say, speech and language therapy for a year or whatever it is, the ombudsman can sort of make provision for that, and it might sort of order that certain therapies are put in place, and it may sort of there may be some sort of compensation there as well for parents.
Yeah, it can be a challenging process, can't it? Because I think you're trying to get the best education for your child, you've got to figure out and navigate this path. So you mentioned legal aid there. If parents do feel that they need some support with navigating this process, how do they go about accessing that? What are the next steps? And if they are unable to get legal aid, are there other guides, or is there anything that you would suggest they look at if that issue of obtaining legal aid, or they haven't got the finances to fund it themselves? What are their options, basically?
Right. So first of all, I mean, legal aid, you would only get legal aid, they would look at your financial situation first. For judicial review for a child, it could come under public law. But what I would say is they need to call the legal aid agency. It's called the civil legal advice. So if parents would just look up civil legal advice, there's an advice line. Give them a call to find out whether you qualify. Now, if you did, they would put you in touch with an education solicitor who'd be able to help you on those rates. Okay, so that's the way in. What else could they do? I would say there are great organisations like SOSEN, SOSSEN, who are very good at writing pre-action letters and may be able to assist. They may ask for a small fee, all right, but very worth sort of looking into. So that's SOSEN. The other one, IPSI, is great as well, all right. Probably not for judicial review though, but in terms of challenging local authorities with just letters to their legal team, etc., or to send officers, etc., they have precedent letters on there as well. If a local authority's gone over their 20-week timetable, or they've not had anything following the annual review, they will have precedent letters on on their website. So that's well worth having a look at, with the law, etc., all set out. So I find those two are very helpful.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. And just two more questions from me. Well, one from me and one from our previous guest on the podcast. A little bit of sort of a difficult question for you, I suppose, really. We all know, or many of us know, we've got some SEND reforms potentially coming on the way. Yeah. The white paper has been delayed, so we're not quite sure at the point of recording the podcast when it's due out. We think sometime in the new year. Yeah. From your perspective, what are the things that we maybe need to think about or prepare for, or where do we think that might take us?
Well, I think one of the key things that they're looking at is the financial aspect of SEND. That has been made very clear, I think. And they must be looking at ways in which local authorities can reduce the cost, the cost to local authorities can be reduced. Now, one of the ways in which that could be done is looking at what maintained mainstream schools are doing, and whether they can take on some more of the, special educational needs children, perhaps with some training, etc. We may be seeing more units, more resource bases to support those children. Accountability also is something that's, I know lots of parents, everyone working in SEND has sort of said very clearly, very loudly, where's the accountability? I don't know what the SEND paper is going to be doing about that. There's also talk about streamlining the EHCP process, making it clearer. No one seems to know what goes on in these panel meetings at the local authorities, and what decisions made and why, and what minutes are kept, but it's just a no, you're not having that and that's it. So looking at that possibly, and also there's talk about early provision, early years, getting provision in early. Now we all know that's, of course, that should be happening. I suppose it's just how. If you're also looking at how much it's all costing as well. So it's all going to be tied up with funding, I'm afraid to say, but I fear that without additional funding, we are just going to be throwing things to mainstream schools to be dealing with more and more, I think. So it'll be interesting to see, what's going to happen. The teacher's going to be getting more training around special educational needs so that, they can meet the needs of more children, perhaps in mainstream schools.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be a challenge, I think, and we'll hopefully be able to come back to you once we've had the white paper for a bit of an update. And we can see where
absolutely.
we need to go from there. So, one last thing from me before we sort of finish. As you know, we have a little bit of a tradition where we ask our previous guests to ask a question of our upcoming guest. So before I ask you for your question for our next guest, I've got a question here for you from Helen O'Neill Nash, who is from Billy's charity, who support parents through birth injury litigation process. And Helen asks, for any parent who is in the world of EHCPs, they know how traumatic it is, how much time it takes to get the local authority to take any action. It's a constant cycle of ignoring timelines, submitting a complaint, receiving an apology. It isn't helping anyone. I don't know what the answer is, but what would Laxmi's suggestion be, and how can it be better?
A magic wand, Claire. Well, for me, as someone in the legal sphere, we have the law. I'm not suggesting we tweak the law. It's there. It sets out, what families are entitled to. It sets it out very clearly. The thing that's missing is the accountability. That's the thing. There's no point in having law if people can breach it and nothing happens. So it's how do we bring that accountability in? It's all there in the law, and there's a good reason it's all there. And if it all worked, it would be so helpful. But the accountability is not there. So it's giving some thought as to how we're going to hold local authorities to account. Local authorities and I think health as well. They need to work together. We need to have local SEND areas, and they need to be, I'm not saying they need to be Ofsteded, but they need to be, someone needs to look at what's happening and, looking at how many breaches are going on and what are we going to do about that. Yeah. So for me, it's accountability.
I think that's a massive challenge, and it is something from the parent's perspective that I know a lot of people get frustrated about. Helen mentions it in a question, the sort of that constant cycle of making a complaint and pushing things down the line and things continually being a battle, and I think that's a big challenge. And I agree with you, the law is there, the rules are there that should be being followed on all sides, and that is where it seems to be falling down. So a big challenge. It'll be interesting to see what the white paper says and what the next steps are for SEND children and their right to education and getting them the education that they need. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Thank you for all of the information you've given us, and I'm sure it'd be a massive help to parents and also to the professionals that are supporting them in whatever capacity that be, whether it be an education professional, whether it be somebody working in the legal field but a different area, or whether it be, somebody from the local authority maybe, or even somebody from government who's taking some of these decisions. Hopefully they, take on board some of the things that is being shared with them about what the system looks like and what changes perhaps we do need to focus on to make things better for everyone. So thank you for that. It's been really lovely talking to you about that. Our next episode is going to be Sarah Edwards, and she works for the Scope Disability Charity, and she's a specialist, a CP specialist. If you could leave a question for Sarah, what would that be?
So mine's a very simple question. If someone were to ask me this question, I know what my answer would be. So I'll put it to Sarah. My question is simply, what do you enjoy most about your position with Scope? What do you like doing, when you're working with families?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's sometimes things like that we miss when we're talking to professionals, because it's I'm sure it's a very rewarding role that she's got, and it'll be interesting to hear her answer. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time today. It's been really lovely talking to you. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Thanks very much for joining us. If you've got any questions, please contact us at enquiries@braininjurygroup.co.uk. Thanks once again to our sponsors, Abilities Enabled.